Have you ever wondered what happens when racist cops stop the wrong person? Not a criminal, not a suspect, but a man who has spent over 20 years defending his community. Imagine this: a decorated police captain handcuffed on his own street in broad daylight, treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin. What those officers didn't know was that the man they tried to humiliate was about to turn their world upside down. It was a crisp morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops, casting long shadows across freshly watered lawns. People were beginning their day, some heading to work, others walking their dogs. Among them was Captain Marcus Taylor, a highly respected officer with over 2 decades of service. Marcus wasn't just any cop. He was a man who had built his reputation on fairness, integrity, and standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. On this particular morning, Marcus wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a simple hoodie, jogging pants, and sneakers. To his neighbors, he looked like any other man going for a quick run before breakfast. But to the 2 police officers cruising down the street in their patrol car, Marcus looked like a suspicious black man in the wrong neighborhood. The patrol car slowed, then stopped right in front of him. The sound of the tires crunching against the curb caught Marcus's attention. He pulled out his earbuds, already sensing what was coming. Sadly, he had seen this scenario play out before, not just in news headlines, but in real life. One of the officers stepped out. He was young, mid-20s, with an arrogance that clung to him like a badge he hadn't yet earned. "Hey you, what are you doing here?" the officer barked. I raised an eyebrow. "Taking a jog. Is that a problem?" The second officer got out too, hand resting on his holster, eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe. "We got a call about someone suspicious in the area. You match the description." Marcus sighed. He knew exactly where this was headed. "And what description would that be?" The officer didn't answer directly. "ID, now!" Marcus could feel the weight of the situation. He'd handled countless confrontations as an officer, but being on the other side of it, being profiled in his own neighborhood, was a different experience. He reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. He showed his driver's license, calm but firm. "This is my address," he said, pointing at the card. "I live here." But the officers didn't back off. One of them snatched the ID, scanning it like it was fake. The other circled Marcus as if he were a threat. Neighbors began peeking out their windows, some even stepping outside to see the commotion. And that's when it happened. Without warning, the younger officer grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it behind his back. The other snapped on the handcuffs with unnecessary force. "You're resisting," the officer muttered. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady, despite the humiliation burning inside him. "I'm complying. You're making a mistake." But they didn't listen. To them, he wasn't Captain Marcus Taylor, decorated officer, respected leader, family man. He was just another black man to be controlled. The scene grew tense. Some neighbors gasped, whispering among themselves. A few pulled out their phones, recording what was happening. Marcus stayed calm, his training kicking in. He knew anger would only escalate the situation. And yet, deep inside, a fire burned. This wasn't just about him. This was part of a larger pattern, something countless men and women had endured. It was one of those black racism stories that never should have happened, but kept happening every single day across America. And now it was happening to him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice, training younger officers to treat people with respect, and standing up against prejudice inside the force. Yet here he was, humiliated on his own street in front of his own home by officers who should have been his brothers in blue. "Check his wallet again," one of the neighbors shouted. "That man lives here. He's a police captain." The officers ignored them. They had already made up their minds. Marcus's wife, Angela, rushed out of the house. Her voice cracked with panic. "What are you doing? That's my husband. He works with the department." The officers froze for a second, exchanging uneasy glances. But instead of releasing him, they doubled down. "Ma'am, stay back. We're handling this." "Handling what?" she snapped, pulling out her phone to record. "You're assaulting a man for jogging in his own neighborhood." The tension was electric now. More neighbors gathered. Some shouted at the cops, others just filmed in stunned silence. Marcus stayed calm, his training kicking in. He knew anger would only escalate the situation. And yet, deep inside, a fire burned. This wasn't just about him. This was about every person who had been stopped, searched, handcuffed, or worse, simply for existing while black. And now, it was happening to him.
The cold bite of the steel cuffs dug deeper into Marcus's wrists. Every second felt longer as the two officers stood firm, refusing to admit their mistake. The street had now turned into a stage, and everyone was watching. Phones were up, voices were raised, and tension was thick enough to cut through the morning air. Angela's voice rose above the crowd. "You're arresting a decorated police captain, my husband." The younger officer laughed dismissively, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Ma'am, don't make this harder. He doesn't look like a captain to me." Those words stung. Not because Marcus needed validation, but because they revealed the ugly truth. To these officers, his 20-plus years of service, his medals, his leadership, meant nothing. All they saw was his skin color. Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. His training had taught him not to crack under pressure, not to let anger cloud judgment. But this wasn't a tactical drill. This was his life, his dignity, his family. "I've dealt with men like you before," Marcus said calmly, locking eyes with the officer. "You think the badge gives you the right to disrespect people? But let me tell you something. The badge is supposed to protect, not humiliate." The officer smirked, clearly uncomfortable at how composed Marcus remained. "Save it for the station. You're coming with us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A neighbor shouted, "This is wrong. He's not a criminal. He's one of the best men in this community." But the officers refused to let go. They tightened their grip and began to walk Marcus toward the patrol car. Each step was heavy, each movement a reminder of how far prejudice could go. And yet Marcus's head remained high, his eyes unwavering. He knew something they didn't. This wasn't going to end the way they expected. Angela followed closely, recording every second. "You're making the biggest mistake of your careers," she said, her voice shaking with both fear and fury. "When this video goes online, the world will see exactly who you are." The older officer hesitated for just a moment. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He knew the situation was spiraling out of control. The crowd was growing, and every phone pointed at them meant accountability. Still, the younger officer pushed on. "Keep recording, lady. It won't change anything." Marcus stopped walking. His voice dropped to a level so calm, so commanding, that it silenced the entire street. "You think you're in control right now? But you're not. The moment you cuffed me, you lost control. Do you know why?" The younger officer frowned, clearly irritated. "Why don't you enlighten me?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone sharp but steady. "You cuffed the wrong man. I'm not just some jogger. I'm Captain Marcus Taylor, 22 years on the force. I've trained officers better than you. I've commanded divisions larger than your entire precinct. And when I walk into headquarters later today, both of you will have to answer for this." The words hung in the air like a hammer ready to drop. The older officer's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in the department knew Captain Taylor, a man who had broken barriers, earned commendations, and commanded respect from the highest ranks. His stomach sank. But the younger one scoffed, trying to save face. Nice story. Anybody can claim they're a captain. Angela stepped in, holding her phone high. Then why don't you run his ID through your system? You'll see exactly who he is. Reluctantly, the older officer pulled out his radio. His voice cracked slightly as he gave Marcus's name and license number. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Seconds ticked by like hours. Finally, the response crackled through the radio. Confirmed. That's Captain Marcus Taylor, high-ranking officer, command staff. The street fell silent. The younger officer froze, his arrogance draining from his face. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some cheering, others shouting, "We told you so." Cameras zoomed in, capturing every bead of sweat on the officer's forehead. Angela's voice was sharp as a blade. "Now take those cuffs off my husband, right now." Hands trembling, the younger officer fumbled with the keys, unlocking the cuffs. The metallic click was louder than anything Marcus had ever heard. His wrists were free, but the damage was done. Marcus rubbed his sore wrists slowly, his eyes never leaving the two officers. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about every single person who has been treated the way I was today. People who didn't have the rank, the badge, or the voice to defend themselves. People whose stories never got recorded, never got justice. These are the black racism stories people try to ignore, but they are real. And today the world just witnessed one more." The crowd applauded, some shouting his name, others chanting for justice. The older officer lowered his head. "Captain, Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to this community. Apologize to the people you swore to protect, but instead choose to target." Angela stepped closer, wrapping her arm around her husband. "We're not letting this go," she said firmly. "This video is going to make sure the world sees what you did." Marcus turned to the crowd, his voice powerful, commanding attention like he was back in a briefing room. "Let this be a lesson. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. But together, we can change this. Together, we can fight back against injustice." The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones were raised higher. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a turning point. The two officers stood frozen, their authority shattered, their arrogance exposed. The younger one looked pale, realizing his career might have just ended on this very street. The older one sighed deeply, already knowing his report would be the beginning of an investigation that could shake the entire department. And Marcus, he didn't need revenge. He had something far more powerful: the truth, the people, and a voice that could no longer be ignored. The morning that began with humiliation had transformed into a moment of justice. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. His story wasn't over yet. And neither was the fight for those who couldn't speak for themselves.
The ride to headquarters was silent. Not for Marcus, who sat tall in the back seat of his wife's car, but for the two officers who trailed behind in their patrol unit. Their hands gripped the wheel tighter than ever. They weren't leading anymore. They were being led. Angela drove, her eyes still burning with anger. "You handled yourself with such control out there," she said softly, "but I saw the pain in your eyes. They treated you like a criminal in front of our neighbors." Marcus nodded slowly, rubbing the faint red marks on his wrists. "I've seen worse, Angela. But what makes today different is that everyone saw it too. They can't bury this, not anymore." When they pulled into the precinct parking lot, heads turned immediately. Officers outside looked up, curious at the sight of Captain Marcus Taylor stepping out of his wife's car, not a patrol car. His uniform wasn't on, but his presence commanded the same respect. Inside, the air shifted. Whispers ran through the station. "Did you hear what happened? Those two arrested Captain Taylor? Unbelievable." The younger officer's face was pale. The older one, though silent, carried the look of a man who knew his career had just taken a brutal hit. Marcus walked straight through the station, his shoulders squared, every step echoing with authority.
He didn't need to shout. His very presence spoke volumes. In the chief's office, the atmosphere was tense. The chief of police, a graying man with decades of service behind him, stood as Marcus entered. His expression was a mix of anger and disappointment. "Captain Taylor," the chief began, gesturing to a chair, "I just got the report, and I saw the video." He turned his eyes to the two officers standing stiffly near the door. "Do you realize what you've done?" The younger officer stammered, "Sir, we thought—" "Thought what?" the chief snapped, his voice booming. "That a black man jogging in his own neighborhood must be a suspect? That you could put him in cuffs without even checking his ID properly? Do you have any idea the kind of storm you've brought down on this department?" Silence. Only the hum of the overhead light filled the room. Marcus sat calmly, watching them squirm. But he wasn't here for apologies. He was here for accountability. "Chief," Marcus said firmly, "this is bigger than me. If this can happen to a captain, imagine what happens every single day to regular people. This isn't an isolated mistake. This is part of a pattern." The chief nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You're right, and I can't let this slide. Internal Affairs has already been notified. Both of these officers are suspended effective immediately, pending investigation." The younger officer's face turned red. "Suspended? But, sir—" Marcus cut him off. His voice was steady, powerful. "Don't talk. Just listen. Because for once in your career, you're going to hear the truth without being able to hide behind your badge." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on theirs. "Do you know how many black racism stories start the same way? A man walking, a woman driving, a teenager in a hoodie, someone minding their business until someone like you decides they look suspicious. That suspicion isn't based on facts. It's based on fear, on prejudice, on the lie you tell yourself that you're protecting people when in reality you're targeting them." The room was silent, heavy with truth. Marcus continued, "You didn't just humiliate me, you humiliated this department. You humiliated every officer who puts their life on the line and actually serves with honor. And you humiliated yourselves." Angela, who stood quietly in the corner, added sharply, "And you traumatized a community. Our neighbors saw what you did. Children saw what you did. They'll remember that long after this day is over." The chief cleared his throat. "Captain Taylor, I assure you this will be dealt with. But I think the people need to hear this directly from you." Marcus stood, his presence filling the room. "Then let's not wait." Minutes later, he stood before a press conference outside the precinct. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, microphones pushed toward him. The video of his wrongful arrest had already gone viral online. The world was watching. Marcus raised his hand and the crowd quieted. His voice carried like thunder, calm but commanding. "This morning, I was handcuffed by two officers of my own department, not because I committed a crime, not because I posed a threat, but because of what they assumed when they saw me, a black man jogging in his own neighborhood." Gasps rippled through the reporters. "I've spent over 20 years serving this city, protecting its people and leading this department with integrity. But today, I was treated the same way countless others have been treated. Today, I became another chapter in the long list of black racism stories that too often go unheard." The camera zoomed in, capturing every word. "But here's the difference," Marcus continued, his tone rising. "I have a platform. I have a voice, and I refuse to let this be buried. Not just for me, but for every man, woman, and child who has ever been profiled, disrespected, or humiliated because of the color of their skin." The crowd erupted in applause. Some reporters shouted follow-up questions, but Marcus raised his hand again, silencing them. "To the officers who wronged me, accountability is coming. To the community, justice will be demanded. And to every person watching this who has ever been silenced, know this: you are not alone. Your story matters. Your pain matters. And together, we will make sure your voices are heard." The applause thundered louder, echoing across the city. Behind him, Angela wiped a tear but stood proud, knowing her husband had turned his pain into power. The two disgraced officers stood at a distance, heads hung low, knowing their careers would never recover. And the chief? He knew this moment would change the department forever. Marcus didn't just speak for himself. He spoke for everyone who had been ignored, disrespected, and silenced. His story was now their story. And the world was finally listening. The press conference had ended, but the ripple effect had only just begun. By the next morning, Marcus's story was everywhere. News stations replayed the footage of him being handcuffed in his own neighborhood. Talk shows debated the deeper issues of systemic bias. Social media exploded with hashtags, #JusticeForMarcus, #EndRacial Profiling, #WeStandWithTaylor. But the most powerful voices weren't the anchors or analysts. They were the ordinary people sharing their own experiences. A teenage boy posted, "I was stopped last week for walking home with headphones in. They searched my bag for no reason. Thank you, Captain Taylor, for speaking up." This is one of the many black racism stories no one listens to. A mother tweeted, "My son is only 8, but he already knows to keep his hands visible when police are near. Marcus Taylor gave me hope that change is possible." Within 48 hours, Marcus's story wasn't just about one man. It had become a mirror, reflecting countless untold truths. At the kitchen table, Marcus sat, his phone buzzing nonstop. Angela scrolled through the messages. "Marcus, look at this. Hundreds of people are asking you to speak at rallies. Civil rights groups want to partner with you. This is bigger than we imagined." He rubbed his temples, taking it all in. "Angela, I never wanted to be a public figure like this. I just wanted justice. But maybe justice isn't enough. Maybe it's time to fight for reform." Angela placed her hand on his. "Then do it. You've already lit the fire. Now lead it." That weekend, the city streets filled with people. Hundreds, then thousands marched peacefully, holding signs. "My skin is not a threat. Justice for Marcus equals justice for us all. No more black racism stories." The sound of chanting echoed through downtown. "Enough is enough! Enough is enough!" Marcus stood on a stage at the heart of it all, looking out over the crowd. Faces of every color, every age, every background. Some carried candles, others held their children high on their shoulders so they could witness history in the making. When Marcus stepped up to the microphone, silence fell. "I want you to look around," he began, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person who has been stopped, searched, humiliated, or treated like less because of the color of their skin." The crowd cheered, but Marcus held up his hand. "But I don't want applause. I don't want sympathy. I want change, real change. No more videos that shock the world for a week and then get forgotten. No more names added to a list that's already too long. No more black racism stories being brushed aside like they don't matter." The energy of the crowd surged. People shouted in agreement. Some cried openly, holding hands with strangers beside them. Marcus leaned closer to the mic, his tone rising. I was a captain in this very police department. I know the good officers. I've served with them. But I also know the flaws, the biases, the training gaps, the culture that looks away when injustice happens. And I'm here to say, enough. We can't wait for someone else to fix it. We must demand it. We must be it. The chants grew louder. Justice now! Justice now! From the edge of the crowd, Angela watched proudly, tears glistening in her eyes. Her husband wasn't just speaking as a victim, he was speaking as a leader. But not everyone was pleased. Inside the walls of the police department, some officers muttered under their breath, complaining about Marcus's words. He's making us all look bad. He should have handled this quietly. He's stirring up trouble. The chief, however, stood firm. He addressed his staff bluntly. If calling out racism makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you shouldn't wear this badge. Marcus Taylor didn't embarrass this department. You did when you put cuffs on him for jogging while black. If you can't see the difference, you're part of the problem. Those words spread almost as fast as Marcus's speech, and slowly something began to shift inside the force. Younger officers started asking for better training. Community leaders demanded body cam accountability. Politicians began drafting bills aimed at curbing racial profiling. The movement was no longer confined to Marcus's city. Other towns picked it up. More rallies formed. More people spoke out. Marcus became a symbol, not because he wanted to, but because he represented what too many had felt for too long. His story had awakened something larger. One evening, after another exhausting day of meetings and interviews, Marcus sat on the porch with Angela. The summer air was warm, the sound of distant chants from another march drifting through the streets. "Do you ever wonder," Angela asked softly, "why it had to be you? Out of all the black racism stories we've heard, why did this one catch fire?" Marcus stared at the horizon, thoughtful. "Maybe because I had the rank, the badge, the uniform they couldn't ignore. And if even I wasn't safe from prejudice, then it proved no one was. Maybe people finally saw the truth they couldn't deny anymore." Angela squeezed his hand. "Then promise me one thing. Don't let this moment fade like the others. Don't let them forget." Marcus turned to her, his jaw set with determination. "I won't. This isn't just my story anymore. It's everyone's, and we're not done." And that night, Marcus drafted an open letter. It began, "To every person who has faced injustice, to every family who has been silenced, and to every voice that has been ignored, your story matters. Your fight is my fight. Together, we will not be forgotten." The letter went viral within hours, and in living rooms across the country, parents showed it to their children. Teachers read it aloud in classrooms. Activists printed it on posters. Marcus Taylor wasn't just a man who survived an injustice. He had become the face of a movement. And that movement was only just beginning.
Marcus thought the marches and speeches were the peak of it all. But within weeks, the fight for justice reached an even bigger stage. A senator's office reached out, then a governor's aide. Finally, the phone call came from Washington itself. Marcus had been invited to testify before Congress. Angela nearly dropped the phone when she heard. "Marcus, do you understand what this means? They're finally listening. They want your voice in the national conversation." Marcus, however, wasn't smiling. "Angela, you know how politics works. They'll try to use me for headlines, then bury the issue when the cameras turn off. If I go, I can't just tell my story. I need to carry every story with me, every injustice, every unheard voice. Otherwise, this will be just another news cycle." Angela nodded, her eyes fierce. "Then carry them, Marcus. Don't just speak for yourself. Speak for everyone who can't." The morning of the hearing, Washington buzzed with anticipation. The grand chamber was packed. Senators, representatives, journalists, activists, and citizens who had flown across the country just to see history. As Marcus walked in, dressed in his formal uniform, medals shining, shoulders squared, the room fell silent. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol. The chairperson welcomed him. "Captain Marcus Taylor, we thank you for being here. Please, share your experience." Marcus leaned into the microphone. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of generations. "Honorable members, I'm here today not just as a police captain, but as a black man in America. Weeks ago, I was handcuffed in my own neighborhood while jogging. Why? Because I fit a description. That moment was humiliating, terrifying, and wrong. But it wasn't unique. It was part of a long chain of black racism stories that too many of us know by heart." He paused. Cameras clicked. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I wore this badge for over 2 decades. I trained officers. I led teams. I swore an oath to protect and serve. And yet, even with my record, even with my uniform, I wasn't seen as a captain that day. I wasn't seen as a neighbor, a husband, or a father. I was seen as a suspect because of my skin." The room grew heavy with silence. Marcus continued. "I don't want sympathy. I don't want apologies. I want accountability. I want laws that prevent racial profiling. I want oversight that ensures every badge upholds justice, not prejudice. And most importantly, I want a future where my children and yours don't have to add their names to a list of victims before something changes." As Marcus finished, the crowd behind him erupted in applause. Some lawmakers clapped hesitantly, others with genuine conviction. Cameras flashed, capturing his defiant stance. But outside the chamber, not everyone was cheering. That night, Marcus scrolled through his phone. Supportive messages poured in, but so did threats. Anonymous texts, angry voicemails, social media posts calling him a traitor, accusing him of betraying the police brotherhood. Angela sat beside him, worry etched into her face. "Marcus, these people are dangerous. Maybe you should step back. Think about our safety." Marcus looked at her, then at the glowing screen in his hand. "Angela, if I step back now, everything we've built, every march, every voice that rose because of this, it'll collapse. Fear is what they want. Silence is what they count on. I can't give them that." She gripped his hand tightly. "Then we stand together, always." Over the next few weeks, momentum surged. Lawmakers introduced a new bill named the Justice Accountability Act, directly inspired by Marcus's testimony. It aimed to outlaw racial profiling, require nationwide de-escalation training, and enforce independent review boards for misconduct. Protests grew louder, not in anger, but in hope. For the first time in years, people believed change was possible. Marcus traveled city to city, speaking at universities, community centers, even churches. At each stop, people shared their own black racism stories. Stories of traffic stops gone wrong, of opportunities denied, of fear passed down from parent to child. And every time, Marcus told them, "Your story matters. Speak it, write it, share it, because silence is how injustice survives." But the fight was far from easy. Police unions pushed back hard. Conservative media painted Marcus as anti-police, twisting his words into attacks. Some officers he once called friends stopped speaking to him altogether. One night, a brick was thrown through his car window. On it, a note read, "Shut up or else." Angela was shaken, but Marcus remained calm. "If they're this desperate to stop me, it means we're winning." She swallowed hard. "Marcus, promise me something. Promise me you won't let this fight consume you. Promise me you'll come home safe." He kissed her forehead. "Always. But Angela, if not me, then who?" Weeks later, Congress held the final vote. The Justice Accountability Act passed, not unanimously, but by a historic margin. Tears flowed in the gallery. Activists embraced. Marcus sat in silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. Reporters rushed to him afterward. "Captain Taylor, how does it feel to know your story helped pass this law?" Marcus shook his head. "It's not my story. It's our story. Every voice that stood up, every march that filled the streets, every black racism story that demanded justice, that's what made this possible. I was just the messenger." That evening, Marcus returned home. He sat on the porch again, looking at the sky. For the first time in months, he felt peace. Angela joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You did it," she whispered. Marcus smiled faintly. "No, we did it. And this is just the beginning." The camera of history would move on one day, but the law was in place. The voices had been heard, and the man who was once handcuffed for fitting a description had become the face of justice itself. Marcus knew the fight wasn't over, but tonight, under the quiet glow of the porch light, he allowed himself to breathe and to believe, because change had finally begun. The weeks after the Justice Accountability Act passed felt surreal. News anchors called it a historic shift. Headlines carried Marcus's face alongside words like hero and reformer. But Marcus didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a man who had simply refused to stay silent. One evening, he was invited back to his old neighborhood, the very place where the nightmare had begun, where he had been handcuffed for fitting a description. The community had organized a gathering at the park. Hundreds showed up. Parents, children, elders. Some carried candles. Others held signs that read, "Justice for all," and "We stand with Marcus." As Marcus stepped onto the small wooden stage, the crowd erupted in applause. He looked out and saw faces shining with hope, with pride, with determination. He raised his hand for quiet, and when the noise faded, he spoke. "Standing here tonight feels strange, because this is where it all began, right here. A few months ago, I was treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. I was humiliated in front of strangers, threatened by the very people I once trained. That night, I felt powerless." He paused, scanning the crowd. But then something happened. I spoke up, you spoke up. We refused to let the story end in silence. And now, together, we've turned pain into progress. The crowd cheered, but Marcus wasn't finished. This law that passed, it's not the end. It's a beginning. Real change doesn't live on paper. It lives in people. It lives in what we teach our children, in how we treat our neighbors, in how we demand accountability when wrong is done. If we stop here, nothing truly changes. The crowd listened intently. Even the kids, usually restless, stood still. I've heard hundreds of black racism stories since this journey began. Mothers telling me about sons who were harassed for no reason. Fathers explaining how they had to teach their children the rules of surviving a traffic stop.
young people who lost hope because doors kept closing on them just for being who they are. These stories break your heart, but they also fuel the fight. Angela, standing at the front, wiped away a tear. Marcus's voice grew firmer. So tonight, I don't want you to celebrate me. I want you to celebrate us. Because every time someone spoke up, every time a protest filled the streets, every time you refused to be silent, that's what forced change. That's what passed the law. And that's what will keep pushing this movement forward. After the speech, people lined up to thank him. An elderly woman clutched his hand and whispered, "I never thought I'd see this day before I die. Thank you, son." A teenager hugged him and said, "You showed me I don't have to be afraid to speak. I want to tell my story now too." And a little boy, no older than 10, looked up and asked, "Does this mean when I grow up, they won't see me as dangerous anymore?" Marcus knelt, holding the boy's shoulders gently. "It means when you grow up, you'll have more people fighting to make sure you're safe. And maybe one day, you'll join that fight too." The boy smiled, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Later that night, back home on his porch, Marcus sat quietly with Angela. The cicadas buzzed, the night air was warm, and the stars glimmered faintly above. Angela leaned her head against his shoulder. "You changed the world, Marcus." He chuckled softly. "I didn't change the world. We nudged it forward. A little. But there's still so much more to do." She kissed his cheek. "Then we'll keep pushing. Together." The next morning, Marcus opened his laptop. His inbox was overflowing with messages from people across the country. Some were stories of pain. Others were stories of courage. Many ended the same way. "Thank you for speaking when I couldn't." Marcus realized then that this wasn't just his fight. It was a fight he had inherited, one carried by generations before him, one that must be carried by generations after. So, he began writing. He collected stories from strangers, neighbors, even fellow officers who admitted they too had witnessed racism within the system. He wanted to build something bigger, an archive, a living record of Black racism stories that would ensure no voice was lost again. It wasn't just about remembering injustice. It was about documenting resilience. Months later, Marcus stood once again in front of cameras, not as a victim, not even as a reformer, but as the founder of the Justice Voices Project, a national platform dedicated to amplifying unheard stories and pushing for continued reform. His closing words that day echoed across television screens, radio stations, and social media feeds. "Racism thrives in silence. Justice lives in truth. If you have a story, don't hide it. Share it. Tell it in the comments. Because silence protects racism, but stories build justice. Together, we can fight for what's right."